Krush Groove didn't ask for permission. It kicked the door open. A legendary nightclub got padlocked shut on the very last day of filming. A future comedy icon hid in the crowd, and nobody noticed. And the label this movie was built to celebrate almost didn't survive long enough to see it released. Today, you're getting 18 wild facts that rewrite what you thought you knew about this hip-hop landmark, plus one bonus twist at the very end that almost nobody ever talks about. So stick around, because the list starts right now. 1. Russell Simmons turned this down twice. Russell Simmons turned this movie down twice before he ever agreed to make it. Here's the twist nobody expects. The film that became hip-hop's defining cinematic document almost got made by two completely different people, without Simmons anywhere near it. The first offer came from Harry Belafonte, who was developing what eventually became Beat Street. Simmons passed, feeling the project treated rap like a passing curiosity instead of a real cultural force. Belafonte moved forward without him. The second offer came from Menahem Golan, the Israeli producer behind Breakin' and its sequel. Golan figured rap was the next trend to cash in on before it faded. Simmons said no again, for the exact same reason. But here's the thing. Those two rejections gave Simmons total clarity on what he actually wanted. He brought in producers George Jackson and Doug McHenry, hired director Michael Schultz, and got Warner Brothers to fund it. The fad exploitation movie Golan wanted to rush out, became something else entirely. 2. Warner Bros. Stepped in after Columbia walked. Columbia Pictures agreed to fund this movie, then dropped it completely before a single camera rolled. Getting Krush Groove made meant surviving a studio abandonment before production even started. Columbia had backed the project first, but cold feet set in fast. Previous music movies had underperformed, and the studio decided the risk wasn't worth it. They walked away just weeks before shooting was supposed to begin. Warner Brothers stepped in instead, and here's where it gets interesting. Their reasoning had almost nothing to do with hip-hop. The script needed a female love interest, and Sheila E. happened to already be signed to Warner Brothers Records. That connection made the casting convenient and the financing simple. The Prince factor was real, but secondary. Sheila E. had just come off The Glamorous Life, written and produced by Prince, who'd made Warner Brothers a fortune with Purple Rain the year before. She landed the role because they needed a woman in the plot, and she was already on the label. The result divided audiences hard. New York viewers who'd lived the real scene met her Minneapolis funk sound with audible hostility. Some screenings reportedly turned into booing matches. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. 3. Shot in 26 days before the tour buses left. This entire movie was made in 6 months because half the cast was about to disappear on tour. The production timeline wasn't aggressive by choice. It was aggressive by necessity. Several of the film's biggest performers had tours scheduled that would pull them off the grid for months. The window to get everyone in front of a camera at the same time was narrow, and it was closing fast. Filmmakers had exactly 6 months from green light to finished film before that window shut for good. The project started under the working title Rap Attack, and the first script draft leaned more on a fictional white girl breaking into the business than the actual New York rap scene. Simmons rejected it. Writer Ralph Farquhar, known for Happy Days and fame, delivered a second draft that Simmons approved. Shooting ran just 26 days in April of 1985 across the Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens on a budget of $3 million. Locations included the Marble Hill projects in the South Bronx, plus Silver Cup Studios and the legendary Disco Fever Club. The crew had to keep the street slang authentic while making it understandable for audiences who'd never heard it, all in under a month of shooting. 4. The only trained actor in the whole cast. Every major hip-hop act in this film played themselves except for the one guy leading it. Run-DMC, the Fat Boys, Kurtis Blow, Rick Rubin, Sheila E., the Beastie Boys, New Edition, LL Cool J, and even Russell Simmons himself all appeared as versions of themselves. Conventional casting was almost pointless because the people living this story were already on set, but somebody had to play Russell Walker, the fictional stand-in for Simmons, and that role needed actual dramatic training. None of the artists around him had any. Blair Underwood was 21 years old, professionally trained, but without a single feature credit to his name. Krush Groove was his first movie ever. Now here's where it gets interesting. Gloria Schultz, The director's own wife had coached actors on Cooley High a decade earlier, and she stepped back in to coach the musicians throughout the shoot. Underwood went straight from this film to LA Law. The role that demanded a professional actor in a movie full of non-professionals ended up launching one of the biggest television careers of the late 1980s. 5. The first choice for the lead got rejected. Before Blair Underwood ever got the part, Russell Simmons wanted someone completely different playing him. His pick was Fab Five Freddy Braithwaite, hip-hop artist, graffiti pioneer, and downtown New York cultural fixture who'd later host Yo MTV Raps. The choice made total sense on paper. Fab Five Freddy lived at the intersection of hip-hop and the broader New York art scene, with real street credibility and the cultural fluency to bring depth to a character based on one of the most complicated figures in the music business. The producers said no. They wanted a trained actor for the lead, and Underwood got cast over Simmons' own objection. But wait, there's more to this than just a casting disagreement. Plenty of critics and viewers later felt the performance lacked the specific energy that defined the real Simmons. The central character in a movie about hip-hop ended up feeling like the one person in the room who hadn't actually come from hip-hop, which, in the end, was exactly true. 6. Spike Lee got turned down for a job here. Spike Lee actually tried to get hired on this production and got rejected. In the spring of 1985, Spike Lee was scrambling to raise money for what would become She's Gotta Have It. He needed funds, and he needed work. Krush Groove was shooting across New York at that exact moment. A film with a black director, black producers, and a subject Lee understood instinctively. He approached the production about a job as assistant director, hoping the paycheck would help underwrite his own project. He didn't get it. Here's the wild part. She's Gotta Have It still came out in 1986 anyway, financed through other means on a budget of roughly $175,000. It won the Youth Film Award at Cannes, launched Lee's entire career, and became one of the most significant independent American films of the decade. The production that turned him away watched him become one of the most important filmmakers of his generation just 12 months later. 7. Prince secretly played everything on this track. One of this soundtrack's biggest songs was basically a secret Prince solo project. Sheila E. got the credit as lead vocalist on A Love Bazaar, and the track appeared on her 1985 album, Romance 1600. But Prince, who co-wrote it with her, quietly played almost every single instrument heard on the recording, aside from Eddie Minfield's saxophone. Now check this out. That includes the distinctive Lynn drum machine groove driving the whole rhythm, the popping synth bass line giving it that funk bounce, and the Wes Montgomery-style guitar solo during the extended fade-out. He even sang the backing vocals himself, essentially harmonizing with his own voice behind Sheila E's lead. This wasn't unusual for Prince during this era. He was simultaneously building his own career while quietly producing for artists like Sheila E, Vanity 6, and The Time, often letting his collaborators take the spotlight. The only official writing credit he received on the album was for this one song. 8. A megaphone stopped a fight on set. Filming came to a complete standstill when a fight broke out over who actually invented hip-hop. Tensions erupted between black and Latino extras on set. And this wasn't a minor disagreement. Latino extras argued hip-hop was a collaborative creation between black and brown communities working side by side in the same neighborhoods. Black extras pushed back, insisting the Latino influence came later and that credit for the culture's invention belonged elsewhere. The fighting turned physical. Multiple incidents broke out, and production was genuinely at risk of shutting down entirely. Russell Simmons grabbed a megaphone and addressed the crowd himself. His message was blunt. "It's black invented," he said, "but now everyone is rocking to it, so let's stop fighting and finish this movie." It worked instantly. The set calmed down and filming continued. Here's the thing. The argument Simmons settled with a megaphone in 1985 has never actually been fully resolved anywhere else. It's still debated in documentaries, academic papers, and comment sections 4 decades later. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. 9. A future comedy legend hid in the crowd. Long before he became one of America's most famous comedians, Chris Rock appeared in this movie completely uncredited. At just 20 years old, Rock was an unknown trying to break into show business in New York, picking up whatever work he could find while grinding away at stand-up in local clubs. During one of the film's climactic scenes, where a fight breaks out in the crowd at a nightclub, careful viewers can spot him standing near a telephone as a background extra with no lines and no significant screen time. His appearance was so brief he didn't even receive credit in the closing titles. But wait, there's more to why this matters. 5 years later, in 1990, Rock became a cast member on Saturday Night Live, and the rest is comedy history. Major specials, iconic movie roles, and his own television shows followed. That tiny, unremarkable moment standing near a phone in a nightclub brawl scene is now one of those trivia details that only became fascinating decades later, once everyone realized exactly who was quietly standing in the background. 10. Simmons wanted the dialogue much dirtier. The language in this film got heavily sanitized, and Russell Simmons hated every second of it. The street slang of New York's hip-hop scene in 1985 was specific, dense, and completely unfamiliar to most of the country. Warner Brothers wanted the film to reach far beyond the Bronx and Queens, which meant the dialogue had to be softened enough for audiences who'd never heard any of it to actually follow along. The artists despised the compromise. These were people who'd built entire careers on the exact texture of how they and their community actually talked, and replacing that with something palatable for a suburban multiplex felt like a betrayal. Director Michael Schultz remembered Simmons' real position clearly. If it had been up to Russell, Schultz said, somebody would have been dropping a profanity every 20 seconds. The restraint wasn't artistic, it was purely commercial. 11. The Fat Boys' real name origin story. The heartwarming origin story this movie gives the Fat Boys for their name is completely made up. On screen, the trio, originally called the Disco Three, loses a talent competition, drowns their sorrows at an all-you-can-eat buffet, and has an epiphany to embrace their size by renaming themselves. It's a fun scene. It's also pure fiction. The real story is far more businesslike and honestly funnier. Their manager, Charles Stetler, received a hotel bill during one of their early European tours that included a breakfast charge of $350, an enormous sum for one morning meal in the 1980s. Instead of getting angry, Stetler had a moment of inspiration. He suggested the group rename themselves from the Disco Three to the Fat Boys, reasoning that their appetites were becoming part of their brand anyway, so they might as well own it. The group agreed, and it turned into a genuinely smart business move, giving them a unique identity as the fun-loving, food-obsessed trio who brought humor into rap. 12. The murdered DJ story that never made it. Before any of the fictional love triangles or loan shark drama, Russell Simmons wanted to tell an entirely different, much darker story. His original concept centered on Junebug, a DJ who'd been a fixture at Disco Fever and who had been killed. Run-DMC's very first album is actually dedicated to him. He was a real person from the scene Simmons had built his career around, and his death was a story the community already knew and carried. Simmons believed that story had the weight to anchor an entire film. It wasn't a generic rags to riches arc. It was a specific tragedy about a specific person from a world mainstream America had never seen depicted honestly on screen. But here's where it gets interesting. The concept didn't survive the production process. Rewrites driven by Simmons' own concerns about perception, plus pressure from the Fat Boys manager to keep his client's storyline separate, pushed the story toward the safer, fictionalized founding narrative that made it to screen. Junebug disappeared from the script entirely. He got a dedication on a Run-DMC record, but never got the film Simmons wanted to make in his honor. 13. This legendary club never reopened. The nightclub featured in this film got permanently shut down on the very last day of shooting there. Disco Fever, on Jerome Avenue in the South Bronx, wasn't just a filming location, it was a cultural landmark where hip-hop had been invented in real time throughout the late 1970s. By 1985, the club had fallen on hard times, but it still carried massive weight in the community. Owner Sal Abatiello agreed to let the production film there, betting that the spotlight would bring attention back to his struggling venue. That bet backfired catastrophically. Local authorities noticed the filming activity and showed up on the final day of the shoot. The charge was operating without the proper cabaret license, meaning the club had technically been running illegally for years. Disco Fever never reopened. The venue that had hosted the early development of one of the most globally significant cultural movements in American history was shut for good on the same day the film meant to celebrate it finished filming inside its walls. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations. And tell me in the comments, do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. 14. This movie gets Def Jam's history wrong. This film ends with a title card claiming its story was inspired by real events, but the actual history gets rewritten in some pretty significant ways. The movie presents Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons as co-founders of the label from day one. In reality, Rubin founded Def Jam alone, out of his NYU dorm room, in 1984. Simmons joined later. Now here's where it gets interesting. Larry Smith, the actual producer behind Run-DMC's first 2 albums, is completely absent from the film. His production credits get handed to Rubin instead, even though Rubin didn't produce those records. He didn't start working with Run-DMC until their 3rd album, Raising Hell, a year after this movie came out. The financial struggles shown on screen, Russell borrowing from loan sharks, the label on the verge of collapse, were fabricated too. Simmons himself has acknowledged that Subplot was invented purely for drama. It's not a documentary, and it says so in its own credits. But the gap between what it shows and what actually happened is wide enough that anyone learning Def Jam's history from this film alone would need to unlearn most of it. 15. The real father played the movie. Preacher father in this film wasn't played by an actor. He was played by the real thing. Reverend Daniel Simmons, the actual father of both Joseph Run Simmons and Russell Simmons, plays the Walker brothers' preacher father on screen. In the scene, Run-DMC and Russell visit the church asking for $5,000 to cover record pressing costs. The Reverend refuses, telling his son this is a test he has to pass on his own. It's one of the stranger casting choices in the entire film. Not because it doesn't work, but because of what it demanded from him. He's playing a fictionalized version of himself, delivering dialogue written for a story that misrepresents his own son's actual history. But here's the thing, the scene absolutely works. Reverend Simmons brings a weight to it that a hired character actor simply couldn't have replicated. 16. A Kevin Smith movie made fun of this film. This movie became an unexpected punchline in a completely unrelated 1999 comedy. In Kevin Smith's Dogma, 2 fallen angels, played by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, get into an argument while reminiscing about their time on Earth. One character mocks the other over an old $20 bet, where his friend had confidently predicted this small hip-hop film would out-earn Steven Spielberg's E.T., the extraterrestrial, at the box office. Now check this out. That comparison is objectively absurd, and that's exactly the joke. E.T. earned over $700 million worldwide and became one of the most beloved films ever made. This movie, despite its real cultural significance in hip-hop history, was a much smaller commercial success by comparison. The fact that Kevin Smith's writers chose this specific title for the reference says something on its own. By the late 1990s, this small $3 million film had become enough of a genuine cultural touchstone that mainstream audiences would immediately get the joke. 17. This film hit #1 and sparked riots. This $3 million film about a rap label almost nobody outside New York had heard of ended up outperforming movies with 10 times its budget. It opened in limited release, but 2 weeks later, it landed at #1 on Variety's list of top-grossing films. By the end of its run, it had pulled in over $11 million domestically, nearly 4 times what it cost to make. Then things got complicated. Audiences at screenings across the country got unruly. The New York Post ran a front-page headline calling it a teen riot. But here's what those headlines missed. The film itself isn't violent or provocative. It's a fairly gentle, semi-biographical musical about young people trying to build something from nothing. The chaos at screenings said far more about audiences who'd been waiting years for a movie that reflected their world than about anything happening on screen. Almost at the end, and the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. 18. This movie helped Def Jam land its big deal. The timing of this film's production wasn't just a coincidence for what happened to Def Jam later that same year. While the movie was shooting in April of 1985, Def Jam was simultaneously negotiating a partnership with Columbia Records, a deal that would provide the distribution infrastructure the independent label needed to actually scale. According to Cornell University's Def Jam exhibition, the fact that a Hollywood studio was actively producing a film about the label's origins helped demonstrate its commercial credibility at exactly the right moment. A Wall Street Journal profile had already crowned Simmons the mogul of rap. Now there was a Warner Brothers movie in production about his story too. That combination sent Columbia a clear message. Columbia signed the distribution deal with Def Jam later that year. That partnership underpinned the label's commercial dominance through the late 1980s and into the 90s, the era of LL Cool J, Public Enemy, the Beastie Boys, and Run-DMC's full mainstream crossover. Bonus: a 17-year-old crashed the set uninvited. And here's the one almost nobody talks about. LL Cool J wasn't part of the original cast. He was 17 years old. With 0 screen credits and no guarantee anyone making this film cared who he was, he showed up anyway. He kept showing up. He tracked down filming locations and arrived uninvited, boombox in hand, performing freestyles for whoever would listen. He did this persistently enough that the production finally had to make a decision: put him in the film or keep turning away a teenager who clearly wasn't going to stop coming back. They put him in the film. His entire appearance runs about 45 seconds. He crashes an audition wearing a Kangol hat, tells his partner to hit the box, and launches into I Can't Live Without My Radio in front of Jam Master Jay, DMC, and Rick Rubin. Jam Master Jay looks furious about the intrusion. The room turns over anyway. It was LL Cool J's screen debut. Russell Simmons later called his persistence a backdoor audition that became a staple of the entire production. 45 seconds of footage nobody planned to shoot ended up launching one of the biggest careers in the history of hip-hop. And those were 18 strange facts about Krush Groove, plus the one bonus story that started it all. This isn't just a scrappy 80s musical. It's the closest thing hip-hop has to a founding document on film, made by the people who actually lived it, compromises and all. If you made it this far, leave a like, screen si mo life, balibo leg, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which fact surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another movie that deserves its own list of strange facts. See you in the next one.